The new Ocelot Limiter is the first in an upcoming series of basically utility type of plugins by Fuse Audio. And as long as it's well programmed, does its job really well and makes your mixing life easier, it's always interesting to check out, which is the case with this Ocelot Limiter. This plugin does not have any gimmicks. Everything included is there to give you all options you need to get the limiting you need. You get release control, input, ceiling, a complete dithering section for when you need to export in lower sample rates, a metering section which works in LUFS with integrated and short-term levels, and you get the absolute max levels in decibels. Nothing to complain here, and I have been using this limiter to get my YouTube videos to the right level for the last 3 or 4 ones. Now, how I usually want to set a limiter on a master, and I can do that with Ocelot Limiter, is to start with setting whatever output ceiling I need. In other words, which absolute level in decibels the audio should not exceed. For me, I have that ceiling usually somewhere between -0.1 of a decibel to -1 of a decibel. For YouTube, I use -1 just to be safe. Then you increase the level to hit that ceiling and you listen what still sounds good. The problem with that is, simply because you increase the level, is that you trick your brain into thinking that it sounds better, just because it's louder. And that's not necessarily the case. With a lot of other limiters, you have to adjust the output ceiling or use some form of gain compensation to counter the level change so you can actually hear what the limiting is doing. And that's why I'm very pleased to see this rather unassuming toggle which says 1 to 1. This one automatically changes the output level to match the increase of input gain. This will allow you to really hear what the limiting is doing. This is such a helpful tool. You can easily change the input level to get a limiting that still sounds good and change, for instance, the algorithm. After you have found your sound, turn the switch off. I get about 4 decibels of level increase, which still sounds good without really trying. Now the plugin has soft clipping as well, and I briefly mentioned the algorithms. And I quote, alter the response of the limiter as well as a soft clipper, making specific algorithms better suited to particular audio material. And this is true. I found that flipping through the algorithms when you limit is worth the effort every time to find something that sounds best. Before I show you some more use cases for this limiter, please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already and hit that little like button. With this next snare, I would use the limiter like this. Simply reduce the ceiling until it starts to hit the limiting. Listen if soft clipping improves the sound. The same goes for the algorithms. I will use the delta switch to dial in the release. If you're in doubt, the auto release usually gets the job done. With these settings, I get around 3 decibels of peak reduction without sacrificing the snare sound. Now this is already a rather splashy sounding snare without much strong attack. Let's work on a snare which is the opposite. This snare has a very strong attack. When I enable Ocelot Limiter, you absolutely can hear the limiting. Now here comes the power of the soft clipper in handy. Listen what happens when I enable it. It absolutely improves the sound. Let's tweak a bit more. Here's the snare in the mix with and without Ocelot Limiter. I get around 2.5 decibels of peak reduction, and maybe I even prefer the snare with Ocelot Limiter enabled. Let's do an example with too much limiting on a bass guitar and find out how Ocelot Limiter will hold up. Start with just a sitting control until you start to hear too much processing by the limiting. Back off when that happens. Use the input to adjust for volume differences and of course adjust the ceiling as well. Experiment with the algorithms and release. The release sounds fine for me here. Now you have a bass line where all dynamics have been squeezed out without compromising a lot in the overall mix. But if you want it as extreme as this, well, that is up for debate. Ocelot Limiter is a clean bread and butter type of plugin, and it does its limiting in an excellent way. Try that for yourselves and find out if it fits in your audio toolshed.